The security guard's radio crackled mid-sentence, his weathered face draining of color as the words, "Code Red, Grizzly Bear Loose," shattered the peaceful October afternoon at Yellowstone Wildlife Center. 2,000 visitors erupted into chaos, screaming families stampeding toward exits while a 600-pound Bruno emerged from the trees, his massive frame moving with deadly purpose through the Montana Wilderness Preserve. Children's cries pierced the air as parents scooped them up, elderly visitors stumbling over abandoned strollers and scattered popcorn. But 74-year-old William Harrison remained motionless in his wheelchair, positioned directly in the bear's path like a fragile island in a sea of panic. His pale blue eyes, clouded by cataracts yet strangely calm, never left the approaching predator. "Get out of there!" Security Chief Rodriguez screamed through his megaphone, tranquilizer rifles already aimed at the magnificent beast. William's arthritic hands trembled slightly as he whispered something impossible. "Easy there, big guy." What connection could this frail old man possibly have with Montana's most dangerous predator? And why wasn't he running for his life? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. William Bill Harrison had never planned on returning to Yellowstone Wildlife Center. For 18 years, the 74-year-old had avoided this place that once defined his life, carrying guilt heavier than the Montana winters. Back in his day, when a man gave his word to care for something, that bond lasted until death. But retirement had forced him to break the most important promise he'd ever made. The morning had started like every other lonely Tuesday in his cramped trailer home. William shuffled to the kitchenette, counting out 12 pills from various bottles. Heart medication, blood thinners, arthritis relief. His Social Security check of $1,847 barely covered rent and prescriptions, leaving little for luxuries like zoo visits. The silence pressed against him like a physical weight. Martha's coffee cup still sat unwashed in the sink, exactly where she'd left it 3 years ago before the cancer finally won. Everything changed when he found the photograph tucked between yesterday's bills. There he was, 30 years younger, bottle-feeding a 3-month-old grizzly cub with eyes like dark honey. Baby Bruno, barely larger than a house cat, clinging to William's flannel shirt with tiny claws. The memory hit him like a punch to the chest. "We take care of our own," he whispered to the empty trailer, using the phrase his father had drilled into him during the Great Depression. The drive to Yellowstone took 45 minutes in his modified van, eating up nearly half a tank of gas he couldn't afford. William's wheelchair bumped over the gravel parking lot, each jolt reminding him of the stroke that had stolen his independence 2 years earlier. The admission price, $15, represented his entire daily budget, but some things mattered more than money. Young security guards recognized his name on the visitor's badge. Bill Harrison. The Bill Harrison? Their eyes widened with something approaching reverence. "Sir, you're a legend around here. The old-timers still tell stories about you and that grizzly cub." William's weathered hands gripped his wheelchair armrests tighter. They remembered. After all these years, people still remembered. What they didn't know was the crushing weight he'd carried since retirement. When the zoo forced him out at 65, citing insurance policies and liability concerns, William had promised Bruno he'd visit every week. "Daddy's not abandoning you, big guy," he'd whispered through the habitat fence. "Just changing shifts." But weeks became months, months became years, and eventually shame kept him away entirely. How do you face someone you've failed so completely? Now, navigating the familiar pathways in his wheelchair, William felt every one of his 74 years. The autumn air carried scents that transported him back: hay, animal musk, the particular smell of love and dedication that defined his 34 years as head keeper. Visitors walked past the old man in the worn baseball cap, unaware they were seeing a living legend making what he believed would be his final pilgrimage. Behind the scenes, director James Morrison watched the security monitors with cold calculation, his finger hovering over a phone that would set everything in motion. At 2:30 p.m., 17 minutes before chaos would engulf Yellowstone Wildlife Center, William Harrison sat motionless outside the grizzly habitat, his wheelchair positioned precisely where he used to read the morning paper to a sleepy cub named Bruno. The bear paced restlessly behind the reinforced glass, a magnificent 600-pound testament to 18 years of growth and wildness. Yet something in those dark honey eyes seemed hauntingly familiar. "He's been agitated all morning," explained Janet, a young zookeeper William didn't recognize. "Keep sniffing toward the main entrance like he's waiting for something." She paused, studying the elderly man's weathered features. "You really raised him from a baby?" William nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "Found him near Glacier Point, 3 months old, mother shot by poachers. Weighed barely 12 pounds, covered in fleas, half dead from starvation." His arthritic fingers traced patterns on his wheelchair armrest, the same soothing motion he'd used to calm the frightened cub decades ago. "Back then, we didn't have fancy protocols. If an animal needed help, you helped, period." Bruno suddenly stopped pacing and pressed his massive frame against the viewing window directly in front of William. The old man's breath caught. Those eyes, intelligent, questioning, almost human in their intensity, seemed to pierce straight through to his soul. For a moment, time collapsed, and William was 46 again, cradling a terrified bear cub while promising, "Daddy's got you now, little fella. You're safe." 3 buildings away, director James Morrison sat in his sterile office, surrounded by efficiency charts and profit projections that had transformed Yellowstone Wildlife Center from a conservation sanctuary into a corporate entertainment venue. At 45, Morrison possessed the ruthless ambition of a man who'd clawed his way up from a childhood defined by poverty and trauma. The Harvard MBA on his wall represented everything his father, killed by a rogue grizzly when James was 8, would never achieve. Morrison's fingers drummed against his mahogany desk as he watched William on the security monitor. The old man represented everything Morrison despised about the sentimental old days of zoo management: emotional attachments to dangerous animals, outdated safety protocols, liability nightmares waiting to happen. But today, William Harrison would serve a greater purpose. Phase 1 initiated, Morrison spoke into his encrypted phone. On the other end, Marcus Webb, leader of a professional hunting team Morrison kept on retainer, confirmed receipt of the unusual contract. "Remember, this needs to look like a tragic accident, system malfunction." No one could have predicted it. Morrison's master plan had been 18 months in the making. Eliminate the most dangerous animals using unfortunate incidents, then replace them with family-friendly exhibits that generated more revenue and fewer insurance headaches. Today's events would provide the perfect justification for putting down not just Bruno but 3 other large predators the board considered problematic. The director's fingers flew across his computer keyboard, accessing the habitat control systems with administrative passwords. Bruno's enclosure utilized a sophisticated electronic locking mechanism, the same type that had malfunctioned at 2 other facilities Morrison had previously managed. Corporate America loved efficiency, even when it came wrapped in tragedy. Back at the habitat, William sensed something shifting in the atmosphere. Bruno's agitation intensified, his massive head swiveling between William and some invisible threat only the bear could perceive. Animals possessed instincts humans had forgotten, and right now every fiber of Bruno's being screamed danger. "Easy, big guy," William whispered, using the phrase that had calmed countless storms over their 8 months together. "What's got you spooked?" Dr. Sarah Chen, the 38-year-old head veterinarian, approached with concern etched across her features. Unlike Morrison, she'd earned her position through genuine dedication to animal welfare rather than corporate politics. "Mr. Harrison, I'm Dr. Chen. I've heard so much about you from the older staff members." She glanced at Bruno, who continued pressing against the glass with unusual urgency. "His behavior is definitely abnormal today. Heart rate elevated, stress indicators off the charts." William studied the bear he'd raised from infancy, noting subtle details others might miss. The way Bruno's ears swiveled toward the control building, the low, rumbling vocalizations that weren't quite growls, the desperate pawing at the lock mechanism. "He knows something we don't," William muttered, a chill running down his spine despite the warm October afternoon. At exactly 2:47 p.m., Morrison pressed enter on his computer. 3 buildings away, electronic circuits received their fatal command. Bruno's habitat lock disengaged with a barely audible click, and 600 pounds of confused, frightened grizzly bear pushed against a gate that suddenly offered no resistance. The first scream pierced the Montana air 12 seconds later. By the 15th second, emergency alarms wailed across 40 acres of wilderness preserve. By the 20th second, 2,000 visitors were running for their lives, while one elderly man in a wheelchair realized his past had finally caught up with him. The emergency alarm pierced the Montana afternoon like a banshee's wail, sending 2,000 visitors into immediate panic. "Code Red! Code Red! Dangerous animal loose! Evacuate immediately!" The automated voice echoed across Yellowstone Wildlife Center as families abandoned strollers, elderly visitors stumbled over scattered belongings, and teenagers trampled flower beds in their desperate flight toward the exits. William Harrison's wheelchair sat motionless in the chaos, an island of strange calm amid the human tsunami. His battery indicator blinked red, 15% remaining, but even if it showed full power, escape would have been impossible. The panicked crowd pressed around him like a living wall, parents clutching children, security guards shouting conflicting orders, the very air vibrating with terror. "Mr. Harrison!" Security Chief Mike Rodriguez's voice cut through the mayhem as he sprinted toward the elderly man. Rodriguez had worked at the center for 15 years, long enough to know the legends about Bill Harrison and his miraculous way with dangerous animals. "Sir, you need to move now. That bear is heading this way." William's weathered hands gripped his armrests as he watched Bruno emerge from the tree line 50 yards away. The massive grizzly moved with purpose, ignoring the fleeing crowds, his dark honey eyes fixed on something specific. Not hunting behavior. William had seen enough predatory stalking to recognize the difference. This was something else entirely. "Can't move, son," William replied with unnatural calm, his voice barely audible above the screaming. "Wheelchair's acting up." The lie came easily, protecting a truth too complex to explain. He'd disabled the joystick himself in the parking lot, making the choice that brought him full circle to this moment of reckoning. Officer Sarah Hendricks, a rookie who joined the force 6 months earlier, aimed her tranquilizer rifle with shaking hands. "Jesus Christ, that thing's huge," she whispered, watching Bruno's 600-pound frame navigate the concrete pathways with surprising grace. "Why isn't it attacking the crowds?" Rodriguez keyed his radio with growing confusion. "Director Morrison, the bear isn't displaying aggressive behavior toward the public. It seems to be moving toward a specific target." Static crackled for several seconds before Morrison's voice responded, artificially calm but edged with something darker. "Doesn't matter, Rodriguez. That animal is a lethal threat to public safety. You have authorization for immediate neutralization." Morrison's words carried the weight of corporate liability and personal vendetta wrapped in official protocol. "Take the shot when you have a clear line. 40 yards. Bruno stopped, tilting his massive head in a gesture so familiar it took William's breath away. The same curious angle the cub had used when learning new commands. trying to understand the sounds coming from his human father's mouth. Recognition flickered in those intelligent eyes. Not the blank stare of a wild predator, but something infinitely more complex. "Easy there, big guy," William whispered, using the phrase that had bridged the gap between species 18 years ago. "Remember your old man?" The words carried on the autumn breeze, and Bruno's ears swiveled forward. His agitated pacing stopped completely. For 10 seconds, predator and prey regarded each other across a divide that should have been unbridgeable. 600 pounds of raw power facing a frail, 74-year-old man whose only weapon was memory. Dr. Sarah Chen crouched behind an overturned picnic table, her veterinary training warring with disbelief at what she was witnessing. "This is impossible," she muttered to herself. "Grizzlies don't maintain specific emotional recognition for 2 decades. Their neural pathways aren't designed for long-term individual bonding with humans." But science couldn't explain the low, rumbling sound emanating from Bruno's chest. Not a growl, but something else. Something that sounded almost like purring. The vocalization no grizzly bear should be capable of making, yet there it was, vibrating through his massive rib cage like a diesel engine running on contentment rather than aggression. 25 yards. Bruno took 3 more deliberate steps, then stopped again. His nostrils flared, processing scents that carried him back through years of captivity to those first precious months when the world smelled like formula milk, flannel shirts, and unconditional love. The olfactory memory banks that had kept William's essence alive through 18 years of separation suddenly blazed to life. "Take the shot!" Morrison's voice crackled through multiple radios, sharp with manufactured urgency. "That bear is threatening a civilian." Rodriguez hesitated, his finger hovering over the trigger. Something about the scene felt wrong. The bear's non-aggressive posture, the old man's impossible calm, the way they seemed to be communicating in a language beyond words. "Sir, the animal isn't displaying hostile behavior. Maybe we should—" "That's an order, Rodriguez!" Morrison's mask of professional composure was slipping, revealing the traumatized 8-year-old boy who'd watched his father die under a grizzly's claws. "Neutralize that threat immediately!" But 20 yards away, Bruno was making a different choice. Instead of charging, instead of following 40 million years of predatory evolution, he slowly lowered his massive head in a gesture that could only be described as submission. Not the cowering submission of a defeated animal, but the respectful acknowledgement of a son recognizing his father after years of separation. William's eyes filled with tears he'd been holding back for 18 years. "You do remember," he whispered, his voice breaking. "My sweet boy, you never forgot your old man." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the emergency sirens seemed to dim as 2,000 people held their collective breath. Social media posts were already going viral. Shaky phone videos of an impossible reunion spreading across the internet at light speed. #Grizzly. Dad began trending within minutes, carrying a story that would challenge everything science thought it knew about animal intelligence and the power of love to transcend species. But in Director Morrison's office, fingers were already dialing the number for Marcus Webb's hunting team. This reunion was about to become a tragedy, and Morrison would make sure there were no survivors to contradict his version of events. 15 yards separated William Harrison from 600 pounds of grizzly bear, yet the distance felt both infinite and non-existent. Bruno's massive form blocked out the October sun as he approached with deliberate, careful steps, each paw placement precise, controlled, nothing like the random aggression of a wild predator. The bear's dark honey eyes never left William's weathered face, processing information at levels that defied scientific understanding. "Sweet Jesus," whispered Officer Rodriguez into his radio, watching through his rifle scope as Bruno performed the impossible. The grizzly was reading William's body language, interpreting subtle cues that spoke of recognition rather than fear. "Director Morrison, you need to see this. The animal is exhibiting complex social behavior. This isn't a typical predator-prey interaction." Static crackled before Morrison's voice cut through, artificially calm but edged with barely controlled panic. "Rodriguez, I don't care what you think you're seeing. That bear is a 600-pound killing machine. One swipe of those claws will disembowel that old man. Take the shot, now." But Rodriguez found his finger frozen on the trigger. In 15 years of security work, he'd never witnessed anything like this. Bruno had stopped completely at 10 yards, his massive head tilted in what could only be described as curiosity, rather than aggression. The bear's ears swiveled forward, catching sounds inaudible to human perception. The wheeze of William's labored breathing, the rapid flutter of an aging heart, the whispered words that carried across time itself. "That's my boy," William murmured, his voice thick with 18 years of suppressed emotion. "You grew up big and strong, didn't you? Just like Daddy always knew you would." His arthritic hands trembled as he reached into his jacket pocket, retrieving a small glass jar that caught the afternoon sunlight. Honey. Local Montana wildflower honey, Bruno's favorite treat from their days together. The sweet aroma hit Bruno's sensitive nose like a lightning bolt of memory. Suddenly, the massive grizzly wasn't a fearsome predator in a modern zoo. He was a 3-month-old cub again, crying for his murdered mother, until gentle hands offered comfort and nourishment. The scent of honey mixed with William's unique human fragrance, Old Spice cologne, heart medication, and something indefinable that meant safety, love, family. Dr. Sarah Chen watched from behind her makeshift shelter, her veterinary training warring with the impossible scene unfolding before her. She pulled out her phone, not to call for help, but to document what might be the most extraordinary example of interspecies bonding ever recorded. "This is Dr. Chen at Yellowstone Wildlife," she whispered into her voice recorder. "I'm witnessing behavior that contradicts every established protocol about grizzly bear psychology. The animal is displaying what can only be described as recognition. Emotional recognition. 8 yards. Bruno took another step, then another, his massive paws making barely a sound on the concrete pathway. His breathing had changed from the rapid panting of stress to something deeper, more relaxed. The low rumbling in his chest continued, that impossible purring sound that no grizzly should be capable of making, yet filled the air like a diesel engine running on pure contentment. "Please, God, let this work," William whispered, unscrewing the honey jar with shaking fingers. The golden liquid caught the sunlight as he held it out, just as he had thousands of times when Bruno was small enough to hold in one arm. "Remember this, big guy. Remember how you used to get it all over your little paws?" The crowd behind the safety barriers had grown silent, hundreds of smartphones capturing footage that would soon break the internet. Children pressed against the glass of the visitor center, their earlier terror transformed into wide-eyed wonder. "Mommy, why isn't the bear hurting the man?" asked a 6-year-old girl, her voice carrying in the stillness. "I don't know, sweetheart," her mother replied, tears streaming down her face as she recorded the impossible reunion. I think they're friends." 5 yards. Bruno's approach slowed to an almost ceremonial pace, as if he understood the significance of this moment. His massive head lowered until his black nose was level with William's outstretched hand. For several heartbeats, bear and man remained motionless, separated by species, united by love that had transcended 18 years of separation. Then Bruno did something that made grown men weep and changed the trajectory of animal psychology forever. He gently, carefully placed his enormous paw on William's wheelchair armrest, the same gesture he'd made as a cub when he wanted attention, when he needed comfort, when he wanted to say, "I love you," in the only way he knew how. "Oh, my boy," William sobbed, his free hand reaching out to stroke the coarse fur of Bruno's massive head. "My sweet, beautiful boy. You remember, don't you? You remember Daddy?" The honey jar slipped from his trembling fingers, golden sweetness spreading across the concrete like liquid sunshine. Bruno's response sent shockwaves through the crowd of witnesses. The 600-pound grizzly carefully, deliberately began to lick the spilled honey, not with the desperate hunger of a wild animal, but with the gentle, almost delicate movements of a beloved pet. And as he licked, he made soft, chuffing sounds that old-timers among the zoo staff recognized as the same contented noises baby Bruno had made during feeding time. "This is impossible, Doctor," Chen breathed, her scientific mind struggling to process what her eyes were showing her. Grizzly bears don't maintain emotional attachments for 2 decades. Their brain structure isn't designed for this level of individual recognition, yet here it is, happening right in front of us. In his office, Director Morrison watched the security monitors with growing horror. This wasn't supposed to happen. Bruno was supposed to attack. William was supposed to die. And Morrison would finally have justification for eliminating every dangerous predator in his facility. Instead, he was witnessing a reunion that would make him look like the villain in a story America was already beginning to fall in love with. "Webb, where the hell are you?" Morrison barked into his encrypted phone. "I need that hunting team here now." 20 minutes out, came the gruff reply. "Traffic's heavy with all the emergency vehicles." "What's the situation?" Morrison's jaw clenched as he watched William actually petting the massive grizzly, both man and bear lost in their own private world of reunion and recognition. Social media notifications were exploding across his computer screen. #GrizzlyDad was trending worldwide, accompanied by videos that made his stomach turn with their implications. "The situation is foobar," Morrison growled. "That bear was supposed to attack. Instead, it's acting like somebody's pet dog. We need a different approach." Back in the main plaza, Bruno had settled into a position that defied every protocol manual ever written about dangerous animal encounters. The massive grizzly lay down beside William's wheelchair, his great head resting against the old man's leg, just as he had done as a cub during their afternoon reading sessions. The sight of such raw, powerful trust reduced hardened security officers to tears. "Easy, big guy," William whispered, his hand moving in slow, gentle strokes across Bruno's fur. "I know I left you. I know you must have wondered where Daddy went, but I never stopped thinking about you, not for one single day." His voice broke as 18 years of guilt and longing poured out in words the bear couldn't understand but felt in every fiber of his being. Officer Rodriguez slowly lowered his tranquilizer rifle, his training warring with his heart. "This changes everything," he muttered into his radio. "Director Morrison, I need you to see this. The bear isn't a threat. This is something else entirely." But Morrison's response carried the chill of calculated malice. "Rodriguez, you have your orders. That animal is a liability that could turn violent at any moment. We have a responsibility to public safety that transcends sentimental nonsense." "Sir, with respect, public safety isn't the issue here. These two obviously have a history." Maybe you should follow orders before you find yourself looking for a new job," Morrison snapped. "I'm implementing Protocol 7. Stand down and let the professionals handle this." Rodriguez felt ice form in his stomach. Protocol 7 meant lethal force, no questions asked, no survivors. But as he looked at the peaceful scene before him, an elderly man finding solace with the bear he'd raised from infancy, Rodriguez made a decision that would define the rest of his career. He turned off his radio and walked away from his post, leaving Morrison's orders unanswered and his conscience intact. The Montana afternoon sun cast long shadows across Yellowstone Wildlife Center as William Harrison experienced what he believed would be his final moment of pure happiness. Bruno's massive head rested against his leg, the grizzly's breathing deep and content as gentle fingers worked through his coarse fur. For precious minutes, the chaos of the modern world faded away, leaving only the simple truth of love that had survived 18 years of separation. Then William felt the familiar crushing pressure in his chest. The heart attack hit like a freight train, radiating pain down his left arm and stealing his breath in ragged gasps. His face went ashen as he clutched his shirt, the small bottle of nitroglycerin tablets tumbling from his jacket pocket to scatter across the concrete. Bruno immediately sensed the distress, lifting his massive head with concern that transcended species barriers. "Oh, God," William wheezed, his vision blurring as cardiac muscles struggled against blocked arteries. "Not now. Please, not now." The irony wasn't lost on him. After 18 years of loneliness, he would die at the moment of his greatest joy, leaving Bruno to face whatever horrors Morrison had planned. Dr. Sarah Chen saw the medical emergency unfolding and moved instinctively toward them, but Bruno's protective instincts kicked in. The grizzly rose to his full height, positioning himself between William and any potential threats. Not aggressive, but unmistakably guarding his vulnerable human father. Chen stopped 20 feet away, her medical training warring with basic survival instincts. "Mr. Harrison needs immediate medical attention," she called out, her voice carrying across the plaza. "That's a cardiac event. Without intervention, he could die within minutes." In his office, Director Morrison watched the security monitors with cold satisfaction. The old man's medical crisis would solve multiple problems simultaneously. No messy investigation into the bear's escape, no awkward questions about emotional bonds between humans and dangerous animals, and perfect justification for eliminating Bruno as a public safety threat. Morrison keyed his radio to address the paramedics staging at the perimeter. "Medical team, be advised that access to the victim is blocked by an aggressive grizzly bear. Do not approach until the animal has been neutralized." The lie came easily, wrapped in official concern for first responder safety. But Bruno wasn't behaving aggressively. The massive bear seemed to understand that William needed help, making soft chuffing sounds while gently nudging his human father with his enormous nose. When William didn't respond, Bruno did something that would later be studied by animal behaviorists worldwide. He began what could only be described as crude CPR, pressing his huge paw rhythmically against William's chest. "Jesus Christ, he's trying to help him," whispered Officer Rodriguez, who had returned despite Morrison's orders. The veteran security chief had seen enough in his 15 years to recognize protective behavior versus predatory aggression. "That bear is trying to save the old man's life." The crowd behind the barriers watched in stunned silence as Bruno demonstrated intelligence that challenged everything they thought they knew about animal cognition. The grizzly's movements were deliberate, careful, applying just enough pressure to stimulate William's heart without causing additional injury. Where had he learned such behavior? The answer lay buried in memories of a frightened cub watching his human father perform mouth-to-mouth on a choking prairie dog 18 years earlier. William's eyes fluttered open to see Bruno's concerned face inches from his own, the bear's warm breath providing comfort against the October chill. "Good boy," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Always were too smart for your own good." He tried to reach for his scattered heart medication, but his trembling fingers couldn't grasp the tiny pills. Understanding somehow, Bruno began sniffing the concrete. his sensitive nose locating each scattered nitroglycerin tablet. With impossible gentleness, the 600-pound predator began collecting the pills in his mouth, placing them carefully in William's palm without damaging a single dose with his massive teeth. Dr. Chen watched in amazement as she called out instructions. "Mr. Harrison, you need to place one tablet under your tongue. Can you manage that?" When William nodded weakly, she continued, "Bruno, yes, I'm talking to you. Please step back so we can help your friend." The bear's response shattered every protocol manual ever written about dangerous animal encounters. Bruno not only understood the veterinarian's words, he actually backed away several feet, giving the medical team clear access while maintaining visual contact with his beloved human father. The gesture spoke of trust, intelligence, and emotional sophistication that existed far beyond current scientific understanding. "This is Director Morrison," came the harsh voice over multiple radio frequencies. "I'm declaring an immediate code black situation. External tactical team inbound with authorization for lethal force. All personnel maintain safe distance and let the professionals handle this." Rodriguez keyed his own radio in response, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd earned respect through years of dedicated service. "Negative, Director. The animal is not displaying hostile behavior. In fact, he's actively assisting in medical care for the civilian. I'm recommending we maintain current positions and allow natural resolution." "Rodriguez, you're relieved of duty. Security protocol is non-negotiable when public safety is at stake." Morrison's voice carried bureaucratic finality, but something else lurked beneath. The tremor of a man whose carefully constructed plans were falling apart in real time. As if summoned by Morrison's desperation, the rumble of heavy vehicles echoed from the parking area. Marcus Webb's professional hunting team had arrived, equipped with high-powered rifles and tranquilizer systems designed for dangerous game management. These weren't zoo security guards trained in animal psychology. These were men who viewed every wild animal as a potential threat requiring immediate neutralization. William heard the approaching vehicles and summoned his remaining strength to speak. "Chan," he called weakly to the veterinarian who remained nearby. "That bear never hurt nobody in his whole life, raised him from a baby. He's not dangerous, just scared and confused." "I know, Mr. Harrison, I can see that." Dr. Chen's voice carried professional calm despite the chaos surrounding them. "But the director has made his decision. Unless we can get you both to safety, this situation is going to end badly for everyone involved." Bruno sensed the changing atmosphere, his keen intelligence picking up on the tension radiating from the humans around them. His massive head swiveled toward the approaching tactical vehicles, and a low rumble began building in his chest. Not the contented purring of earlier, but something deeper and more ominous. For the first time since his escape, the grizzly began displaying behaviors consistent with a wild predator feeling cornered and threatened. "Easy, big guy," William whispered, his medication beginning to take effect as cardiac pressure eased slightly. "Stay calm for Daddy. Don't give them any excuses." But even as he spoke, William could see the transformation beginning in his beloved Bruno. 18 years of captivity had taught the bear that humans in groups often meant pain, confinement, and separation from everything he loved. The sound of rifle bolts being chambered carried clearly across the plaza. Webb's team had taken positions along the perimeter, their weapons trained on Bruno with military precision. These men didn't care about emotional bonds or scientific impossibilities. They saw a dangerous predator threatening public safety, and they had been hired to eliminate threats. "Target acquired," Webb's voice crackled through tactical communications. 600-pound male grizzly, approximately 10 feet from civilian casualty. Requesting permission to engage. Morrison's response came immediately, tinged with satisfaction. "Permission granted. Neutralize the threat with extreme prejudice. Authorization code, Tango 7 Alpha. But as Webb's finger tightened on the trigger, something extraordinary happened. The crowd of evacuated visitors, who had been watching the reunion unfold on their smartphones from the safety of the parking area, began moving back toward the plaza, not running toward danger, but walking with purpose and determination. "You're not killing that bear," shouted a middle-aged woman, her voice carrying clearly across the open space. "Anyone can see he's trying to protect that man, not hurt him." "That's somebody's family right there," added an elderly veteran, his words heavy with recognition of bonds that transcended species. "We don't abandon family, no matter what form it takes." Within minutes, hundreds of visitors had formed a human barrier between Webb's hunting team and the reunion taking place in the center of the plaza. They stood shoulder to shoulder, grandparents and teenagers, families and strangers united by witnessing something that restored their faith in love's ability to conquer fear. Morrison watched his carefully orchestrated plan crumble as ordinary Americans chose compassion over compliance, love over liability. The viral videos were already spreading across social media platforms tagged with #SaveBrunoandBill, reaching millions of people who understood instinctively what the corporate director could never comprehend. Sometimes, love really was stronger than bureaucracy. The human wall between Marcus Webb's tactical team and the plaza held firm, but Director Morrison's desperation had reached a breaking point that transcended rational thought. In his sterile office, surrounded by efficiency reports and liability projections, the 45-year-old director made a decision that would destroy everything he'd worked to build. His trembling fingers reached for the bottom drawer of his desk, retrieving the .357 Magnum he'd kept there since his first day as director. "If you want something done right," Morrison muttered, echoing his father's favorite phrase, "you do it yourself." The weight of the weapon felt familiar in his hands. He'd been practicing at the shooting range for months, preparing for this moment when sentiment would finally be eliminated by cold necessity. In the plaza, William's medication had stabilized his heart rhythm enough for coherent thought, though his face remained ashen with the pallor of a man dancing on death's doorstep. Bruno sensed the persistent danger surrounding them, his massive frame tensing as unfamiliar scents and sounds suggested threats from multiple directions. The bear's protective instincts warred with 18 years of conditioning that taught him humans meant safety and love. "Stay calm, big guy," William whispered, his weathered hand stroking Bruno's coarse fur with movements that grew weaker by the minute. "Don't let them make you into something you're not. You're not a monster, no matter what they say." But even as he spoke comfort, William could feel his strength ebbing away like water through cracked stone. The second heart attack was building in his chest. He could sense it coming with the grim certainty of someone who'd survived 3 previous cardiac events. "Doctor." Sarah Chen crept closer, her medical bag clutched tightly as she calculated risks and opportunities. "Mr. Harrison, I can see you're in distress again. You need immediate medical intervention, or you're not going to survive the next few minutes." Her veterinary training had taught her to read the signs. The bluish tinge around William's lips, the irregular breathing pattern, the way his left hand kept clutching his chest. "Can't leave him again," William gasped, his eyes never leaving Bruno's concerned face. "Promised I wouldn't abandon him twice. Man's word used to mean something in this country." The old-fashioned phrase carried the weight of a generation raised on honor and commitment, when breaking a promise to anyone, even a bear, was tantamount to spiritual suicide. Morrison emerged from the administrative building like a wraith of corporate vengeance, the heavy pistol concealed beneath his jacket but ready for immediate deployment. His Harvard MBA hadn't prepared him for this moment when childhood trauma would finally collide with adult responsibility, creating a perfect storm of psychological destruction. The 8-year-old boy who'd watched his father die under a grizzly's claws had finally found his opportunity for ultimate revenge. "Director Morrison!" Officer Rodriguez called out, recognizing the dangerous gleam in his superior's eyes. "Sir, the situation is under control. The bear isn't displaying aggressive behavior. We don't need additional weapons." "That's where you're wrong, Rodriguez," Morrison replied, his voice carrying the hollow tone of someone who'd crossed a line from which there was no return. "This facility has been compromised by sentimental nonsense for too long. Today we restore proper priorities." His hand moved toward the concealed weapon, fingers wrapping around familiar steel. The crowd of protective citizens sensed the shifting dynamics, their human barrier tightening as maternal instincts and paternal protectiveness kicked into overdrive. These weren't protesters or activists. They were ordinary Americans who'd witnessed something pure and beautiful and refused to let corporate machinery destroy it. Children pressed against their parents' legs, grandparents stood straighter despite arthritic joints, and strangers became family in defense of love that transcended species. "You'll have to go through all of us," declared Janet Williams, a 62-year-old retired teacher whose own father had fought in Vietnam alongside men like William Harrison. "That bear isn't hurting anybody. He's protecting someone he loves, just like any decent creature would do." But Morrison had moved beyond rational discourse into the realm of psychological necessity. The pistol emerged from his jacket like a metallic snake, its barrel reflecting October sunlight as he pushed through the crowd with bureaucratic authority backed by corporate desperation. "This is a public safety emergency," he announced, his voice rising to near hysteria. "That animal is a clear and present danger to everyone here." Bruno's reaction was immediate and terrifying. The massive grizzly rose to his full height, 600 pounds of muscle and claw suddenly transforming from gentle giant to apex predator. His lips pulled back to reveal teeth capable of crushing bone, and a roar erupted from his chest that sent primal fear racing through every human nervous system within hearing range. This was the sound that had echoed through human nightmares for millennia, the voice of the wilderness declaring its willingness to kill. "No!" William cried out, his failing voice somehow cutting through Bruno's territorial challenge. "Easy, big guy. He can't hurt us if you don't let him." But the old man's words were lost in the chaos as the crowd began to scatter, protective instincts overridden by survival reflexes in the face of a truly enraged grizzly bear. Morrison raised his weapon with shaking hands, childhood trauma and adult authority merging into a single moment of destructive purpose. "This ends now," he declared, his finger tightening on the trigger. "This ends the way it should have 18 years ago." But as the director took aim at Bruno's massive chest, William Harrison made one final choice that would define the meaning of his 74 years on Earth. With the last reserves of his failing strength, the elderly man threw himself forward in his wheelchair, positioning his frail body between the gun and the bear he'd raised from infancy. The shot that followed would echo through American hearts long after the gunpowder smoke had cleared, crystallizing the moment when love proved stronger than fear, when family bonds transcended the barriers between species, and when one old man's courage rewrote the rules about what it means to be human. In that terrible instant, Bruno's roar transformed into something else entirely, a sound of anguish so profound it made hardened security officers weep and forced a nation to confront the true cost of choosing safety over compassion. The gunshot cracked across Yellowstone Wildlife Center like thunder, but the bullet never found its intended target. Officer Rodriguez had tackled Director Morrison at the last possible second, sending the .357 Magnum's deadly payload harmlessly into the Montana sky. The two men crashed to the concrete in a tangle of limbs and desperation, Morrison screaming about public safety while Rodriguez fought to prevent a tragedy that would haunt them all forever. "You don't understand!" Morrison shrieked, his carefully maintained corporate composure finally shattering completely. Bears are killers. They destroy everything they touch. My father—" His voice broke into incoherent sobs as 37 years of suppressed trauma came pouring out like poison from a lanced wound, but the damage was already done. The gunshot had shattered the delicate peace between Bruno and the crowd, transforming the gentle giant back into 600 pounds of wild predator operating on pure survival instinct. The grizzly's massive head swiveled between the struggling men and William's slumped form in the wheelchair, confusion and protective fury warring in those dark honey eyes. William had collapsed completely, his third heart attack triggered by the combination of physical exertion and emotional trauma. His weathered face had gone gray as ash, his breathing shallow and irregular. Dr. Sarah Chen rushed forward despite the danger, her medical training overriding basic self-preservation as she knelt beside the dying man. "Mr. Harrison, can you hear me?" she called out, checking his pulse with practiced fingers. "We need to get you to a hospital immediately." But even as she spoke, Chen could see the signs that no amount of medical intervention might be enough. William's lips had turned blue, his eyes were losing focus, and his grip on consciousness was slipping away like sand through an hourglass. Bruno's response defied every textbook ever written about grizzly bear psychology. Instead of fleeing or attacking, the massive predator carefully positioned himself over William's body, creating a living shield between his human father and the chaos surrounding them. His enormous paws bracketed the wheelchair on either side, and he lowered his great head until his muzzle was inches from William's face, breathing warm air over the old man's failing form. "He's trying to keep him warm," Dr. Chen whispered in amazement, her scientific mind struggling to process behavior that challenged decades of established animal psychology. Bears don't exhibit this level of sophisticated caregiving behavior. This is unprecedented. The crowd had reformed around the extraordinary scene, no longer running but standing in respectful silence as they witnessed something that transcended the normal boundaries between human and animal. Smartphones captured every moment, but the videos being uploaded to social media platforms carried a different tone now. Not sensational entertainment, but documentation of love that refused to be defeated by circumstances. Marcus Webb and his tactical team had lowered their weapons, recognizing that any shot risked hitting the elderly man they'd been hired to protect. "This is FUBAR," Webb muttered into his radio, using military terminology that perfectly captured the situation's complexity. "Target is providing protective cover for the civilian. No clean shot available." On the ground, 20 feet away, Morrison continued his psychological breakdown under Rodriguez's restraining grip. "You don't understand what you've done," he sobbed, his corporate authority evaporating into childhood terror. "That thing killed my father, ripped him apart right in front of me. I was 8 years old, and I watched that monster turn my daddy into hamburger meat." Rodriguez felt a flicker of sympathy despite his anger. "Jimmy, that was a different bear. A wild one, probably sick or starving. This one was raised by that old man. Can't you see the difference?" But Morrison's trauma-clouded vision couldn't distinguish between past horror and present reality. Every grizzly bear was the same monster that had destroyed his family 3 decades ago. Dr. Chen continued her desperate medical assessment, working around Bruno's protective presence with the surreal cooperation of a 600-pound predator. "His heart rhythm is erratic," she announced to anyone listening. "Without immediate intervention, he's going to code in the next few minutes." She looked up at Bruno's massive face, somehow knowing the bear understood more than should be possible. "I need to give him medication. Can you help me?" Bruno's response shocked everyone present. The grizzly carefully shifted his weight, allowing Chen better access to William while maintaining his protective position. When she needed to reach William's jacket pocket for more nitroglycerin tablets, Bruno actually lifted his paw to give her room, then gently replaced it without being asked. The level of understanding and cooperation was absolutely unprecedented in recorded animal behavior. "This is impossible," breathed Janet Williams, the retired teacher who had become an unofficial spokeswoman for the protective crowd. "That bear is actively participating in medical care. He understands what's happening and he's trying to help save that man's life." But William was fading fast despite their efforts. His eyes fluttered open one last time, focusing on Bruno's concerned face with the clarity that sometimes comes at the edge of death. "Good boy," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the ambient noise. "Always knew you were special. Daddy's proud of you, big guy. So proud." Bruno's response broke hearts across America as live streams carried the moment to millions of viewers. The massive grizzly began making soft, chuffing sounds, the same contented noises he'd made as a cub when William read him bedtime stories. His great head lowered until his forehead touched William's, and he began what could only be described as grieving, producing low, mournful vocalizations that no wild bear had ever been recorded making. Then something extraordinary happened that would be studied by animal behaviorists for generations to come. Bruno seemed to sense William slipping away, and he responded with behavior that transcended every scientific understanding of ursine intelligence. The bear began what appeared to be mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, covering William's nose and mouth with his massive muzzle and breathing warm air into the old man's failing lungs. "Jesus Christ, he's doing CPR," Officer Rodriguez whispered, momentarily forgetting his struggle with Morrison. "That bear learned CPR from watching the old man work with other animals 18 years ago." Dr. Chen watched in stunned silence as Bruno continued his crude but effective, life-saving efforts. The bear's actions were coordinated with an understanding of human physiology that should have been impossible, yet William's color began to improve slightly as oxygen reached his starving tissues. The crowd had grown silent, except for scattered weeping, as ordinary Americans witnessed a demonstration of love that challenged everything they thought they knew about the natural world. Children pressed against their parents, asking questions about friendship and loyalty that adults struggled to answer. Elderly visitors saw reflections of their own mortality and the bonds that make life worth living. Social media had exploded with #SaveBrunoandBill, but the trending hashtags now carried a different urgency. This wasn't just about preventing a tragedy, it was about witnessing something pure and beautiful in a world that had grown cynical about the possibility of unconditional love. Morrison had finally exhausted his emotional reserves, lying motionless under Rodriguez's grip while tears streamed down his face. "I can't let it happen again," he whispered, his voice hollow with defeat. "I can't watch another person die, because I was too weak to pull the trigger." The confession revealed the true source of his trauma. Not just his father's death, but his own 8-year-old inability to prevent it. But 30 feet away, Bruno was proving that sometimes love really is stronger than death. William's eyes opened again, clearer now, and he reached up with trembling fingers to touch the massive bear's face. "That's my boy," he whispered, his voice carrying the strength that comes from knowing you've been truly loved. "Daddy's right here. We're both right here." The moment crystallized everything that made America great: the willingness to stand up for what's right, the recognition that family comes in all forms, and the understanding that some bonds are too sacred to be broken by bureaucracy, fear, or even death itself. As the Montana sun began to set over Yellowstone Wildlife Center, casting golden light over the most extraordinary reunion in recorded history, It became clear that this story would be remembered long after the participants were gone, a testament to the power of love to transcend every barrier that science, society, and circumstance could construct. 6 months later, the morning sun cast gentle rays through the windows of Sunset Manor Assisted Living, illuminating William Harrison as he sat in his favorite armchair, reading the Helena Independent Record aloud to his most devoted listener. His voice had grown stronger since his recovery, carrying the warmth of a man who had discovered that love really could conquer death. Across the room, separated by specially designed reinforced glass, Bruno lay contentedly in his custom habitat, his dark, honey eyes never leaving William's weathered face. "Says here the Montana legislature is considering a new bill about animal rights," William read, adjusting his reading glasses with hands that no longer trembled. "The Bruno Bill, they're calling it. Imagine that, big guy. You're going to be famous in the history books." Bruno responded with that impossible purring sound that had made him a global sensation, a deep rumble of contentment that vibrated through his massive chest. The transformation of both man and bear had been nothing short of miraculous. William's cardiologist, Dr. Elizabeth Martinez, had initially given him 6 months to live following his triple heart attack. But something about his daily visits with Bruno had strengthened his will to survive in ways that medical science couldn't fully explain. His medication regimen was more complex now, but his spirit burned brighter than it had in decades. Bruno had undergone his own remarkable evolution. The depressive behaviors that had plagued him during William's 18-year absence had completely disappeared. Zoo veterinarians documented improved appetite, increased activity levels, and most remarkably, enhanced cognitive function that challenged every established understanding of grizzly bear intelligence. He had learned to respond to over 50 different commands and could distinguish between 12 different staff members by voice alone. Dr. Sarah Chen, now the permanent director of Yellowstone Wildlife Center following Morrison's removal and subsequent institutionalization for psychiatric treatment, had redesigned the entire facility around the groundbreaking research opportunities presented by the Bruno William Bond. The hastily constructed assisted living suite adjacent to Bruno's expanded habitat had become a model for innovative elder care, attracting visitors from around the world. "You know what I love most about our new arrangement?" William asked Bruno, setting down his newspaper. "I get to keep my promise. Remember what Daddy told you when you were little? We take care of our own." Well, that's exactly what we're doing. Bruno's response was to press his massive paw against the reinforced glass, the same gesture of affection he'd made as a cub. The financial transformation had been equally remarkable. The viral videos of their reunion had generated millions in donations from around the globe, creating an endowment fund that guaranteed both William's care and Bruno's lifelong protection. Corporate sponsors had lined up to support what media outlets had dubbed America's most heartwarming story, though William had insisted that any commercial partnerships maintain the dignity of their relationship. Rebecca Thompson, William's estranged niece, pushed through the habitat door, carrying a fresh cup of coffee and the morning's mail. At 28, she had inherited her uncle's stubborn streak and her late Aunt Martha's nurturing heart. The viral fame had brought them back together after 15 years of family feuding over her parents' disapproval of William's unhealthy attachment to dangerous animals. "Uncle Bill, you've got fan mail from Japan again," she announced, settling into the chair beside him. "And Dr. Chen wants to know if you're feeling up to that documentary crew from National Geographic next week." Rebecca had quit her marketing job in Billings to become William's full-time caregiver and Bruno's unofficial spokesperson, discovering a purpose she'd never found in corporate America. "Tell those fancy TV folks they're welcome as long as they understand this isn't a circus," William replied, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Bruno and I are family, not entertainment." He paused, watching his beloved bear stretch lazily in the morning sunlight. Though I suppose if telling our story helps other folks understand that love comes in all shapes and sizes, we can spare a few hours for the cameras. The legal ramifications of Morrison's breakdown had sent shockwaves through the zoo industry nationwide. Marcus Webb's tactical team had provided crucial testimony about Morrison's premeditated sabotage, leading to federal charges for animal endangerment and attempted murder. The former director now resided in a psychiatric facility, still haunted by the bear attack that had claimed his father 37 years earlier, finally receiving the trauma counseling he should have gotten as a child. Officer Rodriguez had been promoted to Chief of Security, implementing revolutionary protocols that prioritized understanding animal behavior over aggressive control measures. His decision to tackle Morrison had made him a national hero, though he consistently deflected praise toward William and Bruno's extraordinary bond. "I just did what any decent person would do," he told reporters. "Sometimes love is worth fighting for, no matter how impossible it looks." The scientific implications of Bruno's behavior continued to rewrite textbooks about animal cognition and interspecies relationships. Universities worldwide had established research programs based on the documentation from that October day, studying the neurological basis for long-term emotional memory in large mammals. Dr. Chen published papers monthly, but always emphasized that William and Bruno were family first, research subjects second. "You know what I realized, big guy?" William said, rising from his chair with the careful movements of a 74-year-old who had survived 3 heart attacks. "All those years I felt guilty about leaving you. I was missing the point. A man's love doesn't end when he walks away. It just changes shape, like water finding a new container." He pressed his palm against the glass, and Bruno immediately matched the gesture from his side. Children from the local elementary school visited twice weekly, part of an educational program that taught empathy and respect for all living creatures. William had become their unofficial grandfather, telling stories about raising baby Bruno, while the massive grizzly performed gentle tricks that demonstrated his intelligence and emotional depth. The kids called them Grandpa Bill and Uncle Bruno, treating their relationship as the most natural thing in the world. As evening approached, William settled into his bedtime routine, just as he had 18 years ago when Bruno was small enough to hold. He opened his well-worn copy of Charlotte's Web, Bruno's favorite story from their early days together, and began reading aloud while the great bear curled up in his sleeping area, head positioned to maintain eye contact through the glass. "Some pig," William read, his voice carrying the love of a father, reading to his son. "Terrific, radiant, humble." Bruno's breathing grew deeper and more relaxed, that impossible purring sound creating a lullaby that had soothed them both through countless nights. In the distance, the Montana mountains stood silhouetted against a star-filled sky, witnesses to a story that had restored America's faith in the possibility of miracles. Love had indeed conquered death, fear, and every obstacle that circumstances could construct. And in a small room where species barriers had been dissolved by the simple act of caring, an old man and his bear continued to prove that family is defined not by blood, but by the choice to never give up on each other. "Sweet dreams, my boy," William whispered, as Bruno's eyes finally closed. "Daddy will be right here when you wake up. Always." Dear friends, William Harrison's story reminds us that it's never too late to matter to someone. At 74, wheelchair-bound and forgotten by the world, he discovered that the love he'd given 18 years earlier had never died. It had been waiting, growing stronger in the heart of a 600-pound grizzly who still called him Daddy. How many of us worry that our contributions don't matter anymore, that we've been forgotten by those we've loved? William's reunion with Bruno proves that genuine love creates bonds that transcend time, distance, and even death itself. In a society that often discards its elders like outdated technology, this story shows us that our capacity to love and be loved doesn't diminish with age. It deepens, becomes more precious, more meaningful. Every grandparent reading this has planted seeds of love that continue growing in hearts they may have forgotten touching. Every retired teacher, coach, mentor, or simply kind neighbor has left invisible marks on souls that remember. William's story isn't just about a man and his bear, it's about all of us who wonder if our lives still have meaning. They do. Someone, somewhere, still carries your love in their heart, waiting for the moment to show you that you mattered, that you still matter, that you always will. What relationship from your past still warms your heart today? Have you ever experienced a reunion that reminded you how much you truly mattered to someone? Share your stories in the comments below. Your experiences might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.